10 years have passed since the incident, and the children have grown up. Don't forget, Mom, tomorrow is Grandpa's death anniversary. My carefree daughter said that as she rushed out of the house with a piece of toast in her mouth.
Mom, don't forget about tomorrow. See you later.
My son, who said that, has already become a working adult. They were my two pillars, taking care of my father, who had left this world 5 years ago and was washed over by our family. The care of my father, who had dementia, and the quarrels between me and my mother-in-law. My son and daughter have been greatly troubled from an early age due to the circumstances of us adults. I'm sure they wanted to go out freely with their friends. Suddenly, I thought as I looked at the backs of my grown-up children. My name is Abby. I married Jacob, who was 3 years older and a senior at work, after a passionate romance when I was 30. We got our own home and were blessed with a boy and a girl. I thought that the ordinary but peaceful days with my kind husband, children, and our family of 4 would continue. But that happy time suddenly ended. Right after my daughter's first birthday, my husband's father and my mother passed away in a row, and I even lost my husband 2 years later. At the time of my beloved husband's death, I was 45 years old. My son, Mark, had just entered the 6th grade in spring, and my 4-year-old daughter, Nicole, was a kindergartner. How should I raise these children from now on? At the same time as the shock of losing my husband, a wave of anxiety rushed over me. I decided to be strong and never cry in front of the children in order to protect them. At such a time, my mother-in-law uttered hurtless words towards me. Even though you've just lost your husband, you're such an insensitive daughter-in-law. I wonder how you can have such a calm face. It's pitiful for my son. My mother-in-law, who didn't like me, had been saying things like, "You took away my precious son since I got married." Still, these are not words that should be said to a wife who has just lost her beloved husband. My mother-in-law, even when her husband died, went on a trip as nothing happened, even before the mourning period was over. Because it's past the date when I can cancel, she said. It can be said that my mother-in-law perfectly embodies the saying, the obnoxious child is favored by the world. And then the phone call came around the time I returned to part-time work, after my husband's 49th day memorial services was over. You've had it rough, haven't you, Abby? The call came unexpectedly from Auntie Taylor, who lives across the street from my parents' house. She had been occasionally checking on my father, who had been living alone since my mother's death. When my husband passed away, she was one of the first to rush to my side. Actually, there's something I need to tell you about your father. What? Her suddenly lowered voice made me anxious. Sensing my feelings, Auntie Taylor said, It's not a big deal, so don't worry. But drop by your father's place when you have time. I know you're busy, Nicole, but when you do, please visit me too. Her voice returned to her usual cheerful one. Even though she said it wasn't a big deal, I couldn't help but worry and couldn't sleep at all that night. The next day, I was restless and decided to visit Auntie Taylor's house after work and left my daughter's care to my son. No way! Really? And what Auntie Taylor told me was that my father might have dementia. She had previously cared for her own father who had dementia, and she said my father's recent behavior and expressions resembled his. My father, who had been enjoying his hobby of gardening and farming since his retirement, was going to be 74 this year. I had suggested living together after my mother died 2 years ago. But my father laughed it off, saying, It's too early to be dependent on others. I couldn't accept Auntie Taylor's words at face value. After all, at my husband's 49th day memorial service, he was the same as ever. It's only natural for you to be shocked, Abby. After all, your father was always so strong. But Abby, everyone goes through this eventually. Even I thought wouldn't happen to my own parent. As she gently stroked my crying back, she said these words. A few days later, with Auntie Taylor accompanying me, I went to the municipal contact point for a consultation about my father. Then my father had tests in the hospital and was diagnosed with dementia. It was a shock. However, no matter how much I worried or stopped, the fact that my father has dementia would not change. I decided to accept reality and move forward. But whether she knew my feelings or not,
"This is a nice walkway. If you walk leisurely up to there, it takes about 30 minutes.
My mother-in-law, who had come into our house on her own, seemed to have walked from her home. And when she came to the kitchen and said,
"What's for dinner today? What kind of feast will it be?"
she started rummaging around. I was thinking of making curry today, the kids' favorite.
"Is that so? That seems rather common."
My mother-in-law, saying this, began to open drawers. Contrary to my wish for her to leave soon, she now sat down and started to watch me cook. "Mother-in-law, it's getting dark outside, isn't it?"
"Well, I guess I'll have to make do with curry today."
Does she intend to eat here too?
"Is there something you want to complain about?"
No, not at all. My mother-in-law lives with her son and daughter-in-law since her husband's death. But since they both work, my sister-in-law probably gets home late.
"The boys are eating out today. You have to let a couple have free time once in a while."
My mother-in-law finished the common curry I made.
"Abby, could you walk me home? I've had so much I can't move."
Understood. Having enjoyed herself, my mother-in-law came over again 2 days later.
"Such an uncharming child. I wonder who he takes after."
My mother-in-law muttered this loud enough to hear. My son, however, doesn't open his heart to her. It seems he knows the real intention of his grandmother, who has been bad-mouthing me and my parents since he was little. And my son left the house as if he couldn't hear his grandmother's voice. My son, now of age, recently doesn't talk much to me either. And so I consulted my brother, who lives out of town, about my father's dementia. However, my brother said, "I can support financially, but I can't take care of him. The rest is up to you," as if it was someone else's problem. Would I take care of him or not? Managing to persuade my father, who resisted saying, "I want to live in my home, I don't want to leave," I finally brought him to my house. Then one day I received a call from my mother-in-law.
"Are you starting to live with your father from your childhood home?"
I had not yet told anyone about this. "Yes, it's true, but how did you know?"
"As I've said many times, you are the wife of my eldest son. Well, it's your decision to live with your father."
"Yes."
"So from now on, please take care of me as well. You've done nothing as a wife of my eldest son up to now. When I say take care of me, all you need to do is bring dinner to my house. If I ever need care, I'll leave that to the wife of my second son. I'm too scared to be in your care."
"Oh, okay." In the end, I couldn't say a word back and had no choice but to comply with my mother-in-law's one-sided demands. Then my life with my father began. I thought I would only need to take care of him on my days off and at night, as he was using day services during weekdays, but my assumption was too weak. Every day while juggling part-time work and childcare as before, delivering meals to my mother-in-law was way harder than I had imagined. I had to get up at 4 a.m. every day and finally get into bed at midnight. The moment I got into bed, I'd pass out. Why do I have to go through all this hardship? But since I decided to do all of this, I can't cause trouble to anyone. These feelings pushed me even further into a corner. And then, something finally happened. One night when everyone had gone to bed, I went to take a bath. As I was about to go back to my room,
"Huh?"
To my surprise, my father was standing still, hunched over in front of the toilet. "Dad, what are you doing standing there?" My father, who has started showing signs of dementia, had an accident in the hallway, failing to make it to the restroom in time. "Oh, you're such a handful. Why did you do it here? Even my 4-year-old daughter, Nicole, can even go to the restroom by herself." I found myself shouting angrily at my father. While his symptoms of dementia were gradually showing, his actions were often hard to understand, and I unwillingly took out my frustration on him. My father hung his head in what seemed like an apology. After changing his clothes, I took my father to the bedroom and put him to bed. Then I went back to my own room. In bed, I berated myself for yelling so harshly and wiped away the tears that wouldn't stop. Still, I must have been tired. Before I knew it, I had fallen asleep, but when I woke up in the middle of the night, I went to check on my father. Oh no. Please tell me this isn't happening. My father, who was afraid of the dark and couldn't sleep without a small light, was nowhere to be found. Could he be in the bathroom? No, he's not there. I looked for him the entire house, but there was no sign of him. Could it be? One of the windows on the first floor was left wide open. He must have gone outside. In a panic, I put on a coat over my pajamas, grabbed my phone and my father's jacket, and was about to leave the house.
Mom, is something wrong?
Turning at the sound of that voice, I saw my son rubbing his sleepy eyes and standing there.
Grandpa is sleeping in my room.
Really? Hearing these words, I felt relieved, and the strength left me. I sank to the floor. Later, when I went to my son's room, I saw my father sleeping peacefully on my son's bed, with a blissful smile. I'm sorry, Dad. My son also got into the bed with my father and fell asleep immediately. The next day, when my son came back from school, he said to me,
Mom, Grandpa said he wanted to go back to his own house.
What? Grandpa said that? When I asked, my son began to tell me about what happened last night.
Maybe we should live with him. That way Grandpa can go home.
Mark.
From now on, I'll look after Grandpa properly. So you don't have to do everything, Mom. I'll help.
My son has always been close to his grandpa. Since my mother passed away, it seems he has been worried about his grandpa and has been visiting him frequently. I thought he was still a small child, but when did he grow up so much? And I made up my mind. We would sell our house and live in our parents' house. Once we had decided, things moved quickly. We decided to renovate the family home to make it more comfortable for my father to live in. My brother, of course, would be the one to provide the funds for the renovation. And so I began to clean up the house we had grown so accustomed to living in.
What's the meaning of this, Albie?
Riding in my sister-in-law's car, my mother-in-law, having heard the news, came to confront us. But why, I wonder? How did my mother-in-law find out about this? I couldn't imagine my sister-in-law had let it slip. Oh, not again. When I took a quick glance at my daughter, she quickly covered her mouth with both hands and started looking around in panic. Seriously. I'm sure my mother-in-law must have asked my daughter with some sweets or something and gotten her to spill the beans. Well, it can't be helped. My daughter is only 4 years old after all. The one to blame is my mother-in-law. Yes, I've decided to live with my father in our old home, so I'll be selling this house.
This is the house my son built, you know? How can you just decide to sell it?
So that's it. She probably thinks I'm planning to use the money from the sale of this house to rebuild the old home.
Thanks to my son's death, you don't have to pay the mortgage anymore, right? Are you trying to make a profit from selling the house?
My mother-in-law spews out such accusations. That's not it at all. My brother agreed to cover all the costs, so the money from selling the house will be used for the children's future. My husband was a kind-hearted man. If he were alive, I'm sure he would have supported this decision. My bold response left my mother-in-law speechless, and she started seeking help from my sister-in-law who had come along with her.
This woman is challenging me, her mother-in-law. You heard her too, didn't you, Lily?
In response to her mother-in-law's plea, Lily said, Is that so? I think you're admirable, sister. It's hard enough to work and raise 2 children on your own, let alone take care of her father as well. It's not an easy task. Furthermore, what to do with the money from the sale of this house is up to her, so I don't think you have the right to interfere. More importantly, please take care of your own from now on, so as not to cause trouble for her. Unfazed by my mother-in-law, my sister-in-law fought back. Even my formidable mother-in-law seemed to surrender at this point. She begrudgingly laughed and said, "Maybe Lily is right," as she tried to brush it off. That served her right. I had anticipated this and told Lily everything in advance. Just then, Lily shared a juicy piece of gossip with me. She said that when she first started living with her husband's family, her mother-in-law used to prepare dinner for the busy couple. The meal she prepared was so terrible it made me dizzy. Never want to experience that again. The look on Lily's face as she recounted the story was unforgettable. Apparently, my mother-in-law, who was terrible at housework, had relied on her husband to cook. Ever since that day, the couple has started having separate meals from their mother-in-law. Lily told me, "Leave it to me." She promised to support my decision to live with my parents. A while later, the renovation of my parents' house was complete, and I was able to move without any issues. My son also started talking to me more openly. Even though his way to elementary school had gotten longer, he reassured me that he was fine. It lightened my heart when I was finally able to tell those around me about my father's dementia, thanks in part to my son's help. I think I became able to interact more naturally and gently with my father than before. As I was helping my father change his clothes as usual, he bowed to me and said,
Thanks for always taking care of me.
The word thanks is a dialect term often used by older people in the area where I live. It seemed that he mistook me for the helper who always takes care of him. He no longer remembers. It had been a while since I saw my father smile so broadly, which made me feel a bit lonely. However, his smile was more heartwarming than anything else.
"Hello, is this Abby? How are you doing?"
One day, such a call came from my mother-in-law. Well, I couldn't help but sigh. Thanks to my sister-in-law, I had finally been released from the stress of my mother-in-law recently. I'm doing just fine, thanks for asking. How about you? Are things still the same with you?
Nothing much has changed. By the way, how's your father doing? Does dementia make him forget a lot?
Why is my mother-in-law suddenly concerned about my father? He's doing well. He seems to remember the past, but recent events, not so much. It varies day by day.
I see. Maybe I should come and visit him sometime then.
That would be troublesome. Your thoughts are more than enough, thank you.
Just thoughts? Should I give about $50? No, about $100 then?
Wait, what? That's not what I meant. Many weird things tend to happen during conversations with my mother-in-law. I'll come to you tomorrow then. With that, I hung up the phone. Since I was off from work the next day, I decided to visit my mother-in-law before picking up my daughter for the nursery. As my car was approaching my in-law's house, the neighbor's wife oddly signaled me to stop. Is something wrong?
I heard your father has dementia and that you moved back to your family home because of that.
Well, yes, that's correct. Surely my mother-in-law must have spread the word.
But you are very brave. Not everyone can do that. I hear many people put their parents in nursery home right away.
Excuse me? I had assumed she was going to be sarcastic.
We need to help each other in times like this, so don't hesitate to ask if you need anything. Also, don't worry about that speaker. Just ignore her and you'll be fine, she said, laughing.
Speaker? Oh, I totally forgot. My mother-in-law isn't very well liked in the neighborhood, but she doesn't realize it. At my father-in-law's funeral, a neighbor who had helped out told me quietly,
"You must be having a hard time with such a mother-in-law, right?"
I remember that my mother-in-law, who always sticks her nose into other people's business and exaggerates their stories to everyone around, was referred to as the speaker in our neighborhood. It took me a while to recall this.
Oh, you're here, Abby?
Whether she smelled my presence or just heard me talking, my mother-in-law emerged from the house.
All right, see you later.
To avoid being caught by my mother-in-law, the neighbor quickly went back inside her house.
What were you talking about with the neighbor?
My mother-in-law can't stand not knowing who's talking to whom and about what when she's not around.
I thought I heard something about a speaker.
Speaker? She's confusing speaker with speaker.
Is this speaker perhaps about a car?
Impressive, you know a lot. As they say, wisdom comes with age. A new car called Speaker has been released, and we were just slyly talking about how I'd love to drive that car one day. To my quick thinking and agreement, my mother-in-law said,
Now you want a car? I wonder where you get the money for such luxury.
It seems that her negative comments are still alive and well. I was feeling tired of dealing with this, so I said, Sorry, but I have to go pick up my daughter now. Bye, and drove off, waving my hand. I'm off to work now, so I'm leaving Grandpa and my sister in your care. If anything happens, call me right away. I handed my son an emergency contact smartphone and headed to work. Boop, 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 boop. During work, my phone in my pocket started to vibrate. When I answered the phone, my son said,
Grandpa is in trouble. Mom, come home right away.
Given the level of my son's panic, I immediately responded, Understood, I'm on my way home now. I left work early to rush home. As I got close to my house, I saw a police car parked in the empty lot next door.
What? What's happening? It's surely not.
When I arrived at the front door, I saw Aunt Taylor and my daughter, who was clinging to Taylor and crying.
It's terrible. You need to go to your dad's room right away.
Huh? What met my eyes when I entered the room was my father scared and hiding behind my son in the corner of the room.
Is that you, Mom? This woman did something terrible to our daughter.
My father, pointing at my mother-in-law sitting down with a pale face, seems to mistake me for his wife. And standing next to my mother-in-law was a police officer.
Your dad suddenly attacked me. I didn't do anything.
My mother-in-law was wailing. In response to her, my son said,
No, Grandpa didn't do anything wrong.
Then my mother-in-law was clearly upset.
Now that your mom's here, why don't you tell us everything you saw and heard?
When the officer said that to my son, he recounted the events from when I left for work until the police arrived. Here is his account.
Hey Grandma, what's going on?
My mother-in-law suddenly came to our house where my son, daughter, and father were.
Mark, Nicole, it's been a while. How have you been?
Yeah, I'm fine.
Nicole, I will take care of Grandpa. Why don't you go with your brother and buy some snacks? I will give you some money.
Upon receiving the money, my daughter took her brother's hand and headed outside.
Let's go now.
However, my son told his sister,
I forgot something at home. Could you wait at Aunt Taylor's house next door?
He left Nicole with Taylor and returned home. When he got home, he secretly peered into the room through a gap in the sliding door.
Hello, do you recognize me? I'm from the bank. Your daughter asked me to bring your passbook and seal, so I came here.
To my surprise, my mother-in-law was trying to deceive my father, who has dementia, into opening his safe. Initially, my father silently listened to her, but all of a sudden, he lunged at my mother-in-law, shouting,
You're the one who treated my daughter horribly.
No.
I have to do something. This is serious. I have to tell Mom. My son, who had witnessed the entire event, immediately contacted and asked Taylor to call the police.
He has always hated me. That's why he's lying.
My mother-in-law, who not only called my son a liar, but also did not admit her guilt, is truly a bad loser.
That's not true. Grandma's a liar.
What?
My mother-in-law, with a startled look from Mark's powerful words, staggered as if she'd been hit by an invisible punch.
People say we should respect the elderly, but people like Grandma, who can lie and be mean, will not be cherished by anyone.
My son said this while looking directly into my mother-in-law's eyes. My mother-in-law, who seemed to have finally given up, was taken away by the police, her head hung low. However, she was never prosecuted. Why then did she have her sights set on my father's safe? According to a story I heard later, she had nearly depleted her savings due to her hobby of traveling and collecting antiques, using my father-in-law's inheritance. It seemed that my mother-in-law, who had targeted my father's safe, had initially made her move. How could she do such a thing? Even though she was never prosecuted, what awaited her was social sanctions. The news quickly spread around her neighborhood. My mother-in-law, who had previously spread exaggerated rumors, now found herself in the subject of gossip and seemed to be shut in her house. While running away might have been an option, she didn't even have the money to move. Abandoned by her younger son's family, who were the only ones on her side, it seems she will spend her last days in a nursery home. As for what happened to her family afterward, thank you, Mark. Thanks to you, Grandpa is safe, and you spoke out what Mom wanted to say, which made me feel better. When I conveyed my gratitude, my son, blushing slightly, said this.
Don't worry. Even if Mom becomes Grandma, I'll protect you.
My son, who I still thought of as a little child, made tears well up in my eyes.
Mom, are you crying?
My daughter peered into my face as she said this.
You should cry when you want to. If you hold it in, you'll get sick, so you can cry a lot too.
As she said this, she handed me a strawberry-patterned handkerchief from her pocket. I had decided not to cry in front of my children, but I learned from them that it's okay to cry when you want to, and there's no need to try too hard. 10 years have passed since then. As for my mother-in-law, due to the progression of her dementia, she no longer seems to recognize her brother-in-law and his wife. Meanwhile, my father passed away 5 years ago, surrounded by his grandchildren. My father, with his hand held by his grandson and granddaughter, took his last breath quietly at home. A single tear flowed from his eyes. As I offered flowers to the portraits of my parents and husband, I looked out the window. There, the leaves were gently falling in a splendid dance, dyeing the park red.